William Balderson, Andrew Vernon, and Neil Tash will display our aircraft stability testing using the program X-Plane, which we will utilise on the Beechcraft Baron 58.
Throughout the simulations, data from both pitch-up and pitch-down oscillations reveal critical insights into the aircraft's dynamic longitudinal stability. When examining the pitch-up oscillation table, we observe an alternating amplitude decay between peaks, characterized by varying damping ratios which fluctuate significantly. For instance, between peaks 1 and 2 in pitch up, the damping ratio is shown relatively slow recovery after initial disturbances. However, damping decreases sharply in peaks 2 to 3, indicating reduced effectiveness of aerodynamic stabilizing forces, potentially a result of an aft center of gravity placement, leading to weaker stabilizing moments. Similarly, within the pitch down oscillation data, a comparable trend emerges but with distinct differences in magnitude and decay rate. For instance, while pitch up damping ratios showed eventual recovery by peaks 5 to 6, pitch down oscillations consistently demonstrated faster initial recovery across early peaks. Hence, damping ratios remained higher overall during similar disturbances. This suggests that for nose down disturbances, the horizontal stabilizer is more effective at generating corrective aerodynamic forces earlier in the stabilization process, compared to pitch up disturbances, where stabilizing forces often lag slightly. Another notable observation is the anomaly between peaks 4 to 5 in both tables. In the pitch up data, representing a one-time negative oscillation growth was potentially caused by interference. Interestingly, in the pitch down data for comparable peaks under similar conditions, damping remains significantly higher, indicating better resilience against disturbances during nose down stabilization compared to nose up recovery. These observations highlight key control implications. Number 1, during pitch up disturbances, damping trends reveal slower recovery rates early on and greater susceptibility to transient instability. Number 2, conversely, during pitch down disturbances, recovery is typically faster and more consistent due to naturally stronger aerodynamic contributions from the horizontal stabilizer acting against nose down pitching moments.
Considering both pitch directions, a careful examination of the two tables exposes obvious longitudinal positive dynamic stability over time. But when compared to nose down stability, bad after posture reduces nose up restoring forces disproportionately and increases workload symmetry for pilots tasked with maintaining trim conditions, hence stressing the relevance of center of gravity location. These results highlight the need of balanced center of gravity landing for safe operation during longitudinal disturbances and shows how dynamic forces of movement interact differently in pitch up and pitch down settings, so greatly corresponding with job objectives.
Angle versus time reveals critical insights into the aircraft's lateral stability characteristics following aggressive roll inputs. Initial roll disturbances induce oscillations in bank angle, with successive peaks decreasing in amplitude, conferring positive dynamic lateral stability. The aircraft naturally dampens these oscillations over time, supported by aerodynamic design aspects such as wing dihedral or sweepback angles that create stabilizing movements due to changes in lift distribution across the wing. From the roll versus time graph, we observe peak values as highlighted, showcasing clear amplitude decay across successive oscillations. Initial disturbances creates a sharp bank angle of around 87 degrees, producing the highest roll energy. By the second peak, amplitude decreases significantly. Further, peaks exhibit steady dampening behavior. Amplitude drops below 20 degrees by peak 6 and settles under 15 degrees by peak 7, indicating recovery toward equilibrium. This trend demonstrates that the aircraft exhibits positive dynamic lateral stability, where oscillations naturally damp out due to aerodynamic forces acting to restore balance. However, these dampening characteristics reveal secondary effects that influence cross-axis behavior, such as pitch coupling effects. Alongside roll disturbance recovery, we observe simultaneous pitch-down tendencies due to reduced vertical lift when the wings are angled away from the horizontal positions. This is clearly illustrated in the altitude loss versus time graph, which is seen in future slides. Initial roll disturbances lead to sharp altitude loss before stabilizing as roll oscillations damp out and the wings regain a level orientation. Is true versus time clearly shows that after rudder deflection introduced a yaw disturbance, the Baron 58 leveled out and began to stabilize without performing a full 360 turn. to return to its original heading. This behavior is consistent with the principles of static directional stability, where the vertical stabilizer generates a corrective force to counteract yaw disturbances. However, unlike perfect stability, the aircraft did not weather vane precisely back to its initial heading due to several contributing factors, such as yaw dampening dynamics. Directional stability relies on aerodynamic dampening forces produced by the vertical stabilizer. While these forces counteract yaw disturbances effectively, they do not always guarantee complete realignment with the original heading due to limitations in dampening efficiency or residual side slip from previous rudder input. Rudder deflection is primarily intended to control yaw along the vertical axis. However, it also indirectly produces roll movements due to differential lift and drag between the wings, a phenomenon known as adverse roll. As seen by roll degree versus time, this roll effect occurs because rudder deflections induce side slip, which changes wingtip angles of attack asymmetrically. The wingtips along the direction of yaw experience relative higher angles of attack and increasing lift, which conversely, the wingtip opposite into the direction of yaw generates less lift due to the reduced angle of attack. Inputs result in slightly less altitude loss compared to roll inputs, as a result consistent with neutral center of gravity placement. A neutral CG produces minimal static longitudinal stability, which allows the aircraft to remain more responsive but reduces its tendency to self-correct pitch deviations that exacerbate altitude loss during roll disturbances. This interconnection underscores how center of gravity placement impacts the coupling between lateral and longitudinal axes, as rolling causes aerodynamic slide slip that interferes with pitch stability. In contrast, yaw inputs produce subtler altitude variations, since rudder-induced side slip avoids significant roll coupling.
In scenario 2, we looked at how the stability of the airplane changed with varying its center of gravity. Two different flights were performed within the weight and balance restrictions, one with the center of gravity set to the front limit, negative 20 centimeters, and the other to the after limit, plus 20 centimeters. We repeated the pitch, roll, and yaw disturbance trials in each configuration. On the left side of the film, the minimum CC trial is seen. On the right side, the maximum CC trial is seen. We examined recovery speed, oscillation behavior, and pilot effort to demonstrate how center of gravity placement affects aircraft stability and control. This is demonstrated in the videos shown on screen.
Following the initial disturbances for the aft center of gravity, the pitch down blue line oscillations appear to dampen out relatively slowly, taking a considerable amount of time to settle back to a near zero pitch angle. The pitch up orange line response also shows a slow return to equilibrium after disturbance. The plots clearly show sustained oscillations in pitch angle after the initial disturbances. The pitch down response exhibits multiple peaks and troughs before eventually settling. The pitch up response also shows oscillatory behavior. These oscillations suggest lower damping. The sustained and larger oscillations would likely necessitate more active and precise pilot input to control the aircraft, hence implying higher pilot workload. An aircraft with an aft CG tends to be more pitch sensitive as well. This means smaller stick inputs can result in larger changes in pitch attitude. While this can offer good maneuverability, it can also make the aircraft feel less stable and require more attention from the pilot to avoid over-controlling. After the disturbances for the forward center of gravity aircraft, the pitch down oscillations seem to damp out more quickly compared to the aft CG case in approximately 20 seconds opposed to 40 seconds. The pitch up response also settles relatively quickly in approximately 5 seconds. The oscillations in pitch angle after the initial disturbances appear less pronounced and damp out faster than in the aft CG case. The peak and troughs of the oscillations are smaller, indicating better damping too. To initiate and control pitch changes with a forward CG, the pilot generally needs to exert more force on the control stick compared to an aft CG. However, once a disturbance occurs, the quicker damping suggests that the pilot might need to make fewer and less aggressive control inputs to stabilize the aircraft, potentially leading to lower workload during the recovery phase. The aircraft tends to resist changes in pitch and returns to its trim state more readily. While maneuverability might be slightly reduced compared to an aft CG, the increased stability provides the pilot with a more predictable and controlled aircraft if CG is forward. After the initial roll disturbance around 165 seconds for the forward CG, the aircraft rolls significantly to a negative angle. However, the recovery to a near-zero roll angle seems considerably faster than in the aft CG case. The oscillations appear to damp out more quickly with the aircraft settling within a shorter time frame. The plot shows multiple roll disturbances and subsequent oscillations. Importantly, these oscillations appear to be more heavy compared to the aft CG case. However, it can be noted that the amplitude of the oscillations decrease as time progresses. To initiate roll changes with a forward CG, the pilot might need to slightly increase initial lateral control forces. However, the quicker settling of oscillations suggests that the pilot would likely need to make fewer and less prolonged control inputs to stabilize the aircraft after a disturbance, leading to a lower overall workload in managing roll compared to the aft CG scenario shown. For the aft CG, following the initial large roll disturbance around 380 seconds, the aircraft exhibits a significant roll excursion, reaching a negative roll angle of over 60 degrees. The recovery to a near-zero roll angle appears to be relatively slow, taking approximately 25 to 30 seconds. There's also a noticeable overshoot and a smaller secondary oscillation during this recovery. The large and relatively slow roll oscillations would likely require significant and sustained lateral control inputs from the pilot to counteract the roll in motion and bring the wings level. This suggests a potentially higher pilot workload during and after the disturbance. With an aft CG, the aircraft might feel more sensitive in roll, similar to the pitch axis. However, in terms of stability, an aft CG doesn't inherently cause instability in the roll axis in the same way it can in pitch. The slow damping observed here could translate to the aircraft feeling less stable and requiring more active control to maintain a desired roll attitude. Static longitudinal stability is the inherent tendency of an aircraft to return to its trimmed angle of attack after being disturbed in pitch without any pilot input. This characteristic is primarily determined by the relationship between the center of gravity and the aerodynamic center, or AC. For an aircraft to be statically stable in pitch, a disturbance that increases the angle of attack must generate a negative pitching moment about the CG, and a disturbance that decreases the angle of attack must generate a positive pitching moment as simulated. The pitch moment coefficient about the CG is directly influenced by the location of the CG relative to the aerodynamic center. A more forward CG increases the static margin, which results in a stronger restoring moment and thus greater static stability. Conversely, an aft CG reduces the static margin, weakening the restoring moment and potentially leading to neutral or negative static stability. Thus, the tendency of the airplane to return to its trimmed angle of attack is a direct consequence of this restoring pitch moment generated by the aerodynamic forces acting on the aircraft due to its static longitudinal stability. The magnitude and direction of this moment are fundamentally linked to the CG's position relative to the AC, as captured in the pitch moment equation and the derivative of the pitch moment coefficient with respect to angle of attack. The crucial significance of appropriate aeroplane loading and adherence to the certified CG limitations is reaffirmed by our investigation. While there may be some performance advantages to operating with an aft CG under some circumstances, stability and control are severely compromised, pilot workload is increased, and overall safety margins are decreased. On the other hand, a forward CG lessens pilot workload during disturbance recovery, improves handling characteristics, increases stability, and creates a safer operating environment. Performance needs and the need for sufficient stability and control over the whole allowable CG envelope must be carefully balanced in aircraft design. To guarantee safe and effective flight operations, pilots must get thorough training on the effects of CG and the significance of appropriate loading methods. The visual evidence from these oscillation plots provides a clear and compelling illustration of these fundamental aerodynamic principles in action.